1. Hi, this is Steve Andersen with the USBA. My special guest today is George Ashby. And to make it even more enjoyable, Mason Shooney is joining us as well. George Ashby is a multiple national USBA champion. He won in 1976, 1981, 1984, came in second place in 1977 and 1980. In 1990, he had a run of 14. Welcome, George.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time out. Mason, I hear that you have quite a history with George.
Yeah, me and George go back over 30 years when I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And George was the best player back then. And we used to have a billiard room in Oak Park, Michigan called Cushion and Q that owned by the late Ray Abrams, and he was one of the biggest promoters in the country back then. And George Ashby, always the one that comes with an invitational from Ray because he was the most popular player back then, and all the other players as well, you know, Ellen Gilbert and Mike Donnelly and Bob Strange and Leatherby, and I can go on and on with so many names back then. But you know, George was unbelievable back then. I mean, he was probably the most popular in the country back then. Also, the best in my book. And I used to watch him, and I fell in love with his game at the time. And he was what an inspiration for me. He was for over the years, and we've been friends ever since. And it was just wonderful to watch him play with the style he has, the methodical that he is in terms of numbers and systems, and his unique European strokes that no one had back then, that he developed his own, I think, from playing in world championships over the years. George is just one of a kind, and he's won so many titles, you know, and I wanted always to be as good as him, you know. And
well, that's quite.
You know, it's just wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a compliment, and George, I'm sure that you know, you feel very strongly about the friendship that you have with Mason through the years as well.
Yes, of course. I watched Mason as a young player in his first tournaments in Detroit, and when I would travel to play there, we played 2 tournaments a year there. Usually the biggest tournament in the United States was Ray Abrams in Detroit for the National Billiard News Open. It drew the 36 players from all over the United States, and it paid the largest prize, first prize of $1,500, I think, back then. And so I watched Mason grow up and mature, and I had suggestions for him, of course, even though he might not have asked for them. But along the way, I tried to help him here and there, so it made me feel really proud of him when he did finally win his first national championship.
Absolutely.
And what year was that, Mason?
2006.
Yeah, 2006 in Florida, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So now Mason has evolved as a world-class player and a wonderful representative of our game.
Yes, I agree. I agree 100%.
Thank you,
let
George.
me ask you. Let me ask you, George. What do you think the strongest part of your game is? And then maybe tell me what you think the weakest part of your game is. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean today, but just overall through your years of playing 3 cushion.
Well, I think this, probably over the years, the strongest part of my game was my imagination for the game and a God-given gift of talent that I developed as I matured, and the gift of being able to travel around the world and see all the great players play, which I incorporated into my game. And probably my weakest would be is I tend to enjoy it too much, and the friendship and the club intercourse and friends all over the world that I've made, wonderful people that I've met that play the game of three-cushion billiards, and it's more like family to me now, and it's difficult to have that killer instinct to play. I think most of my critics said that I didn't play enough defensive shots, and my points against me, my defensive inning average was always too high. But my philosophy was that I wanted to bring my game to a level where I could make, say, a run of 8 in each inning, and I was willing to give my opponent 4 in each inning.
Gotcha.
And
Sure.
And I thought that was good for billiards also, if we were going to have television coverage and entertainment for the spectators. The defensive part of the game is actually very boring for spectators.
Yes.
So I tend to play more offensive and creative.
Mason, question for George?
George,
Yes.
you know the tournaments back in the day. What would I mean? We used to have a ton of tournaments throughout the country. Literally, we used to have 25, 30 tournaments a year. Most of them are small. An example: Chicago was big in billiards back then. Monroe, Michigan, Lansing, Michigan, even Indiana. What would we have to do today to actually improve our sport that we did back 30 years ago? Is it something you would recommend?
To improve what? As we had, I didn't get that one word.
I'm sorry, to improve billiards in general. I mean, do we have to change the way we do tournaments? Do we have to change the way we pay out in tournaments, entry fees, etc., different stuff?
Well, back then we had Gail Johnson,
right,
the Secretary-Treasurer of the American Billiard Association. He was a wonderful promoter of the game, especially in the Midwest, 6, 8, 10 states in the Midwest. And he did this single-handedly, basically. We had also, each billiard room had a house professional billiard player that worked in the billiard room and taught billiards to the pool players and to the novice billiard players, which we don't have those kind of billiard rooms anymore. We're more upscale and diversified in the rooms so that the rooms can survive and make a profit. But I think we do have our very good directors now for the organization, regional directors, and I think that some of the older people could conference with these new directors about how it was done back then and maybe try to emulate that. But the thing is that the directors in their region would have to become more proactive in promoting the tournaments, in soliciting the new room owners to have tournaments, and to be there to help them run the tournaments, because it is a scary situation for a room owner that's never directed a billiard tournament. So I think
you got that right. There's a lot to do. Yeah, good point. Very, very good points you made. Well, let me ask you, through your career, can you pick one or two players that really come to mind that always seem to be the toughest competitor? Every time you played this person, they seemed to always bring their A game, and they always were tough to beat. Who in your mind comes to mind?
Of course, three players, I guess, would fall into that category of national recognition. Would be, I believe, Eddie Robin.
Oh, yes.
Would be the billiard player, the author of a billiard book. And he was always consistent and competitive. And then, of course, Alan Gilbert.
Yes.
Many times, I think maybe 10 times national champion. And he won a lot of his national championships before my time. I came about 10 years later than him or so. And it was usually in the national championship, it was Alan Gilbert was always in there at first, second, or third. And Frank Torres would be the third person. And Frank was not only a consistent player and very competitive, but he was also a wonderful mentor to the younger players coming up. He was such a gentleman, and he taught the players the correct way to play billiards and the gentlemanly way of playing billiards.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, well, those are three big names, and I can certainly understand why they would be on your list. Mason, question?
Question. George, remember years ago, you guys used to play the national championship with only 12 top-ranked players. And it seems like they go based on ranking. Is that true?
The 12 players arrived in that tournament via a sectional qualifying tournaments around the country. And from the sectionals, they qualified for 3 regionals: West Coast region, Central region, and East Coast region. And then they had to be from the regional championship. Only 4 players were the 4 top, first, second, third, and fourth, advanced to the national championship. So the cream of the crop of the United States always surfaced through that network of tournaments and qualification. So when they arrived at the national, the 12 players were the 12 best players for that year to play a 12-man round robin for the United States National Championship.
Yes.
Now, George, do you think today's nationals should be ran the same way that you guys ran it 30 years ago, or should we do an open tournament?
I've actively advocated that over the last 15 years to all the different presidents and board members, and I was a board member a few years back myself, and we just couldn't seem to get it changed back because the national championship has become such a money-making event for the United States Billiard Association. And I was saying that if they ran it with the previous system, the sectionals and the regionals could be the big money-making events, and then the national championship could be the elite prestige tournament that it should be to produce the number one player in the United States.
Well, that's a good point you make, George. The USBA obviously has to be funded so it can run tournaments and promote the game. But
Yeah.
whether that profit has to come at the Nationals specifically or only doesn't have to be the case, and can actually garner its funds during some of the tournaments leading up to the Nationals. That's your point,
Exactly.
right? Yes.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense, actually. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
And in those years of doing it that way, those tournaments were treated with respect, and people were well. It was I don't know what I want to say here. It was a privilege to play in a sectional and a regional, and they were important tournaments, and they were run with the importance of what the national championship is now.
Sure. Yes.
Now, George, one more question. Let me go back to the national one time. I don't want to drag this national issue, but for the lesser player that doesn't have really a chance to be on the top 12, do you think he deserves to be there, or do you think he should have a chance to be there? Or the top 12 players probably they're going to be identical pretty much every year. So do you think the lesser player would complain about stuff like this, or the other members that are not as good?
Well, the lesser players, with this format that we have now, with the qualifying for the national and also the buy-in format for the lesser players, to have the honor and the privilege to play with the great players in the United States. That's been a money-making draw for the USBA. That's why the Nationals expanded to 48 to 54 to 60 players, and so that these people can get in there and have that experience and honor of playing with the great players like yourself or Pedro Buena or Hugo or Patiña. And but I think if we did it the same way for the sectionals and the regionals, they could still have that chance to play with those great players, and then just reserve that national championship for the top 12.
Sure.
And it's going to be a much more interesting, more competitive championship tournament, and it will draw more spectators and possibly draw ESPN or whoever would want to televise it.
Well, that sounds good. I hope that comes to fruition. A couple more things, then. Boy, I'll tell you, our time runs. There's so many questions, and but time's never on our side. Couple things. A shot selection we send to each one of our guests. And I know you didn't have a chance to actually physically look at the diagram, but Mason explained it as best he could on the phone. Your thoughts on the best solution to the shot, George?
Well, Mason suggested that one solution where he was close to the short cushion at number 60 or diamond 1 from the corner on the end cushion there. And if you play that, what we would call a +2 shot, directly into that first cushion next to you, and then the long cushion, and then down to the long cushion behind the two balls. So the problem with that is that any variation in spin or speed, any very slight variation, would limit the success of that shot. So my idea for the shot would be to shoot towards the side rail, up the table from the two balls with reverse spin at the equator 3 o'clock, and then that ball would hit the first long rail, approximately around the center diamond on the long rail, and then it would go across the table to the left-hand long rail near the corner, or maybe diamond 2, and then it would have running English on the cue ball. And it would take running English off that second long rail, running English off the bottom short rail, and then come over to the 2 balls at diamond 25 on the side rail.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I understand that. That makes sense. I think that was one of the shots. Someone else came up with that solution, I believe. So that is definitely a viable shot there. So that's good. Type of cue. Everybody likes to know the best players and what kind of cue they use as far as either the centimeter length or the millimeters of the shaft, the ounces of the cue, the brand that you play with. Can you give us that information, George?
Well, I still carry 2 cue sticks in my cue case, depending on the type of table or the age of the cloth that I'm playing on. If it's an Old Brunswick with old or new cloth, or on European style tables. So over the years, I've gone from 13 millimeter to start with down to 9 millimeter on the tip, and at that time, I believe around the late 70s, even all the world great players, including Raymond Kuhlman's, was playing with about a 9.5 millimeter. Then I've gone back up. I'm around 11.3 millimeter now. I know all the world-class players, including Mason. Shuni is playing, I think, with around 12.5 millimeter. Is that right, Mason?
12.2, yeah, close.
Yeah, so I think all the great players now are playing with that larger tip. But also, we're pretty much phased out Old Brunswick billiard tables now. All the tournaments are being held on European tables. And the 2 cues that I do use, I use a wood joint cue made by Helmstetter that delivers a soft hit, more like a one-piece cue, a one-piece house cue, wooden cue. It gives a soft hit through the joint to the bud hand with feeling, and then I also use a metal joint cue, which is a Ray Schuler, which gives a harder hit, but both cues very precise, and I think the harder hit gives you more deflection off the first object ball, which on slippery cloth and long-angled tables, that enables you to control the angle better with that condition.
What kind of tips do you have on the Helmstetter and the Ray Schuler?
Well, at this time, I'm not using layered tips. I think that they take away from the feeling of the hit. The very hard-hitting, expensive tips, I don't get as much feel of the hit, so
sure. I
prefer a medium soft, and right now I'm playing with a lay professional, and I also like the Chandelier, which I haven't been able to get, which has a red fiber backing on it.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well,
and I like that because it protects the ferrule.
Exactly. Yes. Adrian recommended that tip for me, and I definitely like that red-backed tip, and so it seems to hit well. Well, I'll tell you, time is running. Maybe a nice closing comment or statements, both George and Mason, if you have a story you want to share with us. I'd love to hear one of them.
Go ahead, George.
Too many stories. Well, I have one story. I was playing in national champion San Jose, California, with Carlos Hallen. You mentioned earlier in the beginning of this interview that I had a 14 run in a national tournament, I think in '81 maybe. And I was playing with Carlos in California, and we were playing 50-point game. Carlos had 49, and I had 36. And I made a kiss-in lucky shot and ran 14 and out and left him in the one hole.
Oh, it's fun.
So he hasn't forgotten it. He reminded me at Valley Forge 2 years ago at the National Championship Invitational there in Valley Forge. So that's one of the good memories.
Yeah, he remembers the scratch, not that's the.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank both of you for taking the time. Both excellent ambassadors of the game. You always present yourself well, very professional, and I wish both of you the best success going forward. Closing comments, George, before we say goodbye?
As I had mentioned before, I'd just like to thank God for giving me this wonderful talent that I have for three cushion, an artistic ability. It is an artistic game, and with that talent, I was able to travel around the world and meet wonderful people associated with three cushion billiards. And pool players and billiard players, keep playing, keep improving. There's people that will help you along the way, and the enjoyment is tenfold. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, George, and Mason, thank you for...
Thank you very much, Steve, and God bless, okay?
Take care, gentlemen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.